The first step to learning Maya is understanding the user interface. It's important to know what the interface components are, what their basic functionality is, and where they're located. Let's start by just going to each of the components and discussing them. We'll go to the very top to begin with. On the top is the main menu bar. The main menu bar contains various drop-down menus that hold a number of menu items that allow you to apply the various tools, functions, and options within Maya. For instance, if I click the word window, I'll see a drop-down menu that contains additional items which I can choose. Now there's so many drop-down menus and menu items inside Maya that it has to break them into sets. You can decide what set is visible by going to the menu drop-down bar at the top left. If I change that drop-down menu bar to another option like polygons, you'll see that the menus along the right change. I'll now have a new set of drop-down menus. In this case, this is the polygons menu set, which means I have a bunch of drop-down menus and menu items that are designed for polygon modeling. If I change that drop-down one more time, say the surfaces, I'm now on a different menu set, different drop-down menus. In this case, surfaces contains a bunch of drop-down menus for NURBS modeling. Now you can change this as many times as you want to, but you'll notice that the few first menus along the top left do not change. For instance, File, Edit, Modify. These drop-down menus are really critical because you use the menu items over and over. For example, if I click the word File, I'll see the menu items for Open Scene and Save Scene. The important thing to remember about menu sets is if you don't see a particular menu item or drop-down menu that I'm discussing, make sure you're on the correct set. Now below the main menu bar is a status line, and this actually runs from that drop-down menu bar across all the way to the right. The status line contains various shortcuts. Shortcuts for opening and saving scenes, shortcuts for making selections, shortcuts for snapping, where you snap one object to another, shortcuts for rendering, and shortcuts for transformations. We'll discuss some of these shortcuts in more detail as we go through the series. Below the status line is another set of shortcuts, and this is a shelf area. The shelf area is broken into various tabs. Each tab contains a shelf. Each shelf has a number of icons, which again are shortcuts. So for instance, instead of going up to a menu and choosing the menu item, you can find a shortcut icon that does the same thing. Now these icons are not labeled by default, and in fact this series of icons is given to you by Maya by default. So until you learn what they do, they're not very useful. In fact, I'm not going to use these shelf shortcut icons throughout this series because I think it'll be easier for you to see what I'm doing if I go to a drop-down menu and select an actual item. However, once you get to learn Maya better, you might find that using these shortcuts saves you a little bit of time. Below the shelf area is a viewport area. The viewports allow you to look through various cameras at your 3D objects. It also allows you to manipulate those objects in 3D space. When I say viewport, that's a common term for the view of the camera. However, that's actually part of a view panel. For instance, this is the view of one camera as shown through a single view panel. I can tell it's a panel because there's a set of menus at the top of the panel that affect just that panel. I can tell it's one single camera because the camera name is listed at the bottom of that view panel. In this case, the camera name is PERSP, which is short for perspective. So in other words, I'm looking through the perspective camera, courtesy of a single view panel. Now you can have more than one view panel visible. In fact, there are shortcuts at the bottom left for this. If I click on this shortcut that features 4 little tiny view panels, click that, I can put up 4 different views. In other words, 4 viewports, courtesy of 4 view panels, which are showing 4 different cameras. So I have my perspective view panel, and then 3 orthographic view panels. For instance, top, front, and side. 4 view panels, thus the view of 4 different cameras. If I can go back to these shortcuts over here, and pick a different shortcut, for instance, to go back to a single view. This top button will give me a single view. So I'm back to a single viewport, courtesy of a single view panel. We'll discuss viewports and view panels in much greater detail as we go through this series. Now above the view panel shortcuts is a toolbar. The toolbar has commonly used tools, for instance the select tool, which is the arrow, and your transformation tools, your move tool, rotate, and scale tool. which you'll use to manipulate objects once you have them. Below the viewport area is your timeline, or your time slider. This will allow you to play back your animation once you have animation. To the right of the time slider, in fact, are time controls for playback, and these will be similar to video programs that allow you to play back video. Below the time slider is your range slider. This allows you to set the duration of your animation you might be working with. For instance, the duration of this particular scene is 48 frames. Below the time slider area is a command line. The command line allows you to enter script commands. Maya has its own programming language, and you can enter commands right here. To the right of that is a status line, courtesy of the script editor, where Maya will show text announcements about what's going on in the program. For instance, if there's an error message, you'll see the error message typed out in this area. Above the playback controls is the layer editor. The layer editor is broken up into sub-editors. For instance, the display layer editor, the render layer editor, and the animation layer editor. Layer editors allow you to organize your scene in such a way that only certain objects are visible at certain times, or only certain objects will render at certain times. Above the layer editor is the channel box. The channel box will display features of objects that are selected. In other words, it will show you transformation information, or information about an object's inputs or outputs. This will also hold the attribute editor once we get into manipulating the attributes of objects. So those are the basic interface components given to you by default by Maya, and stay on the screen at all times unless you choose to hide them. Now there are additional windows that will occasionally pop up that you can also use to do your various work inside the program. For instance, if I go up to the window drop-down menu, and then choose the outliner menu item, that'll pop up a separate window for the outliner. I can drag that window around and put it wherever I want. But this is separate from the regular interface components because you can choose to bring it up and display it whenever you want. You can choose to close it by clicking the close button at the top right of that window. And then also it has its own set of menu items. If I reopen that window, you'll see it has its own set of menus. So it'll be separate from the main interface components. But we'll discuss all these windows as they become useful as we go through the series.